Started? All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. My name is Tun Shan. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of History at Columbia University and one of the members of the Sakıp Sabancı Center for Turkish Studies Executive Committee. On behalf of our center's director, Professor Holger Klein, who is unfortunately not with us today due to an international trip, I'd like to welcome you all to today's event, where we are hosting two distinguished guests, Professor Carter Findley and Professor Edhem Eldem. Let me briefly introduce our speakers before I leave the floor to them. Professor Carter Findley is a Humanities Distinguished Professor Emeritus in the History Department at Ohio State University. He is the author of numerous books, the most recent of which is Enlightening Europe on Islam and the Ottomans, Muraja Dosan and his masterpiece. Findley's other recent books include Turkey, Islam, Nationalism, and Modernity, a history from 1879 to 2007, published by Yale University Press in 2010. This book was recognized by Choice as one of the two best books of the year on the Middle East, and it also won several awards, including the Joseph Rothschild Prize from the Association for the Study of Nationalism, and the honorable mention for the Köprülü Book Prize in Turkish Studies Association. The Turks in World History, published by Oxford University Press, also won the British Kuwait Friendship Society Prize for Middle East Studies. Other notable publications by Carter Findley include two very famous books on administrative reform in the 19th century Ottoman Empire. The first one, Bureaucratic Reform in the Ottoman Empire, the Sublime Porte, and the second one, Ottoman Civil Officialdom, a Social History, both published by the Princeton University Press, and both also received numerous prestigious awards. Professor Carter Findley's most recent honors, including the Mentoring Award of the Middle East Studies Association in 2021 and the Pioneer in World History Award from the World History Association in 2019. Professor Findley's newest book, tentatively titled Osman's Dream Fulfilled, A History of the Ottoman Empire, is under contract to Oxford University Press, where it is currently being edited for publication. Joining Professor Findley is Professor Edhem Eldem, currently the Sakıp Sabancı visiting professor at Columbia University. I've been introducing Professor Eldem lately pretty frequently, so I'm sorry sorry for being repetitive, but let me just highlight some achievements and how distinguished Professor Eldem is with his publications and teaching. He taught at Boğaziçi University Department of History for over 3 decades. And also he held positions, visiting professorships in such prestigious institutes like Harvard, Berkeley, Collège de France, or Wissenschaftskolleg in Berlin. Since late 1990s, Professor Eldem is one of the most prolific, if not the most prolific, scholars of Ottoman history, with numerous books, and I just named a few of them. You need to check his resume for the entire list, including French trade in Istanbul in the 18th century, a history of the Ottoman Bank, the Ottoman city between East and West, Aleppo, Izmir, Istanbul, Consuming the Orient, An Ottoman Orient, Osman Hamdi Bey en Irak, Le Voyage Nemrut Dağı de Osman Hamdi Bey and Osman Efendi, L'Alhambra à la Croisée des Histoires, which has recently been translated into English, and we had a very nice book launch event of that book recently, and L'Empire Ottoman that came out 2 years ago. I also would like to thank the Associate Director of our center, Dr. Sümeyye Yar, for arranging everything for this event to happen. And I also note that Today's panel is recorded and will be made available on the Sakıp Sabancı Center YouTube account. Any questions you pose during the Q&A will also be recorded. So without further ado, I'd like to just turn to our distinguished guests.
The last statement sounded like a threat. You say is recorded and will be used against you. I know, yeah. Thank you so much, Tunç. This is not about me. I'm just the piano player, or I'm supposed to engage in a conversation with Carter Findley, whom I have known for now 41 years, I think. It goes back to Istanbul in 1983, when I did some research for you as you were working on Ottoman civil officialdom. Tunç has given a very detailed list of your achievements, so I don't have to do that again. I'll add one with your permission, and I did ask you if you would be offended if I said he is the most southern of Ottoman historians, as you will soon hear. That is, Carter Findley has been in the field for quite a number of decades. Tunç very kindly reminded me that I had taught for more than 3 decades at Boğaziçi, which is true. He graduated from Yale and then did his PhD, partly with Stanford Shaw.
Well, he was my advisor.
Yeah. And defended it in 1968. And sorry.
69.
69. Sorry,
Yeah.
in 69. In 1969, and it was already a prelude to what would be published in the 1980s, that is Ottoman civil officialdom and bureaucratic reform. So what I intend to do, as I said, is just play the piano, that is, engage in a conversation, ask some questions. I think, and I think you agree, it would be nice to start with the most recent work you've done and are working on presently. I've noticed that the title Tunç had for your upcoming book is different from the one I have. So that's the definition of a work in progress, I suppose. But it has the dream in it. So I was thinking we could start with the most recent stuff and then go back. I really want to go back because to me, as somebody who started working on Ottoman history in the 1980s, your 2 books in 1980 and 1989 were extremely important, seminal works that modified the way in which we looked at Ottoman history and at the Tanzimat and modernization. And of course, I would like, if possible, to talk about your experience when you were a researcher back in Turkey in the late 1960s and 1970s. It was a totally different world, as I imagine, and especially for even for me, who am constantly downloading documents from the formerly known as Başbakanlık Arşivi, the Ottoman State Archives, I find it really fascinating to hear from somebody who's been there in those times about how things worked and who was around in those years around the Başbakanlık. And because, again, something I think needs to be underlined, you're the first person to have used the famous Sicil, Sicil Ahval, the famous personnel records everybody tries to use through the online catalog. That is, these personnel records of all the bureaucrats and statesmen and bureaucrats and statesmen, basically, of the Ottoman Empire that started to be collected under Abdülhamid and constitute the most incredible database concerning biographies, prosopography. So Carter Findley was there at the beginning. He is, in fact, responsible for the birth, in the sense of the Sigil Arval, as a medium of knowledge and scholarship in Ottoman history. So, after this long prelude, I think either your ongoing project or Murat Dolson, because I have it with me, I think it's worth seeing. It's brand new. It's a wonderful and wonderfully illustrated publication by Brill, and it's you probably all or most of you know about Murat Dolson's Le Tableau Général de l'Empire Ottoman, which is a source that everybody has used and nobody has studied. I think the irony there is quite obvious. And again, you've been a pioneer. You've been working on him since the late 1990s, and you've come up with this fantastic study of this monumental publication. So, would you mind starting with this?
Well, I'll tell you what, if it was left to me, I think what I would start with is going back through my anticipated and past projects in reverse chronological order, just to make sure everybody knows about some that are still in the dream stage as far as the outside world knows. And just to get those ideas on the table, and then we can see what all we have to talk about. Listen, I'm warning y'all. I'm going to say y'all and just all these Southern things now, because he has opened the floodgates for me. So I'm going to regress to childhood and talk to y'all like, good old boys and good old girls. All right, enough of that already. Yeah, I was always interested in social history, which has, borders on economic on one side and cultural on the other. So if I live to complete them, there'll be 7 of these substantial projects. And number 7 is a study of Fatma Alia, the first Ottoman woman novelist. I've been working on that for over 30 years. At the time when I got serious about those songs, I could have got serious about that. But she had this patron and protector named Ahmet Medhat Effendi, who had published so much more than she did. Is it safe to write about her without knowing more about him? So that started me down the trail to produce my study of Ahmet Medhat Effendi and his Rupa Dabir Javelan, which eventuated in an article called Ahmet Medhat, an Ottoman Occidentalist in Europe. Ahmet Medhat meets Madame Gulnar, which was later published in a short Turkish volume. And then, of course, the other thing was her correspondence with him, which I had in microfilm. And boy, Hattie, if you like to read microfilm, you can really go crazy. But in 2011, 2 stalwart ladies in Istanbul, Zeynep Berktaş and a colleague of hers, published this correspondence. So finally, that is out. And the things that were keeping me from doing my book about Fatma Alia in the early 90s, now I can come back to this. So I have a contract from of something called the One World series about books about important figures of the Islamic world. Because I had to explain to him that just because she didn't write her books in Arabic didn't mean she was not one of those. So I had to get didactic with the editors of that series. Okay, the one that's in the press now is, if the editor will just get through with other projects and come back and work on this one, is a history of the Ottoman Empire, chronologically and topically comprehensive. And I taught that subject to American undergraduates for 43 years, and continuously I was finding new things to add. In the last part, more about non-Muslim communities, for example. So I think the book is original in all its parts, and it also has an articulated thematic structure. Moving on, and the current title, I believe, is Dreams of Empire, a new history of the Ottomans. And I can explain, why we've been going back and forth about the title. The next one past there in reverse chronological is Enlightening Europe on Islam and the Ottomans, which Edhem Eldem has just been talking about. The one after that is Turkey, Islam, Nationalism, and Modernity, published by Yale Press in 2010 and published in Turkey as Modern Türkiye Tarihi. Then the Turks in World History of 2005 was my, Eurasia-wide thing. I was also teaching world history as an ancillary teaching field, and that provides just exactly the stage on which to take a comprehensive look at the history of the Turks. And then going further on back from there, we do get to the two books on bureaucracy. And the short answer there is Schermerhorn made me do it.
Yeah, well, some details about that, because
No, see, you want to start with those.
oh no. I mean, we could go back to the dreams as you wish, but
Yeah.
I think we'll have time to cover them all.
Okay, well, so I think I said enough about the Fatma Aliyah to give you an idea of why it's taken so long. Then about the Dreams of Empire, well, I was first going to call it Osman's Dream Fulfilled, because I've got more information about this dream thing and its thematic analysis. I mean, I have an actual analysis of it that connects it back with the wolf legend about the origin of the Turks. That was one of the findings in my Turks and World History book. In fact, it's the most important thing in the whole book. But like most of the things I have published, nobody has ever noticed it. And so I have to repeat myself in the hopes that maybe, someday somebody will read it and it'll make an impression. And so I was going to call it Osman's Dream Fulfilled. Then we thought, well, that just applies to the early period. So what about, and then my second impulse was, well, how about the Dreams of World Conquest for Suleiman? So I'm going to change it to Dreams of World Empire or something like that. Then Edhem Eldem just said, well, what about that last period when everybody, things were not
Nightmare. I would have proposed nightmare,
Well, yeah, but one of the themes about analysis of the 19th century is that people like the military soldier elites, the askeri Tübbiye people, shifted their loyalties from loyalty to the Sultan to loyalty of their own ideals of the empire. That's Mügeger Czech's ideal. And she calls it ideals, but ideals, dreams. So we can have Dreams of Empire as a title that we can use for all three of those periods, and that would be chronologically comprehensive. Let's see now. I like to, for my books, if possible, have articulated themes and to be thematically integrated from end to end. When you read when I read some of the stuff I used to write, I would think, well, when I started this, did I know what I was going to say at the end of it? Or was that an unexpected surprise? So if you try to articulate themes that have some grip on the empirical data. Well, so anyway, for the Dreams book, it's 5 themes: legitimation, Islam and empire. The second one is conjunctural change. The third is power, centralization and decentralization. The fourth is an empire of communities, from taifa to class and ethnicity. And the last one is Islam and religious diversity, both diversity inside of Islam and between Muslims and non-Muslims. So I think, and I've done something to emphasize those at the beginning, at the end, and briefly at the end of each of the chapters. And I just hope the editor will cut all that, leave it on the cutting room floor. Okay? And I've also,
if I may at this point, because I'm in awe and admiration for something that I would never do, which is, write a history of the Ottoman Empire. I mean, I've done it for the French, but I've done it like a printed Wikipedia thing. I mean, I enjoy doing it, but it's more an essay than really a book. This kind of a project to me seems so daunting, because it's.
Listen, when I was a graduate student, this awful professor I had, who didn't want to pass me on my general exams or anything like that, taught me one memorable lesson. He was in French history, which was something I felt like I had to do to learn method. People in Middle Eastern history don't have methods, so I had to do a Western field for method. And he pointed out to us that these monumental French dissertations for the doctorat d'état would end up, being a 1,000-page book or something like that. Of course, it'd take the person until they were 45 or 50 to ever get the book out. And he said, well, the model is you do something deeply empirical for your first work, like whoever it was published Les Paysans du Nord. And then you have your students work on Les Paysans de l'Est and Les Paysans du Sud. And then you write the monumental book on Les Paysans de France. So, I mean, it's like Sheriff Martin made me work on bureaucracy. Well, this guy told me that, Sonny boy, your number's up. You got to write a history of the Ottoman Empire someday.
Yeah, but I mean, still, I think it's very daunting because you start with the idea that something is missing. I mean, the real challenge is what is it that I'm going to bring to the discipline that's going to be new, that's going to be useful, that's going to be different, that's going to be.
Yeah, but you see, I've taught this stuff for 43 years.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about this the whole time. I had to think about how to do all the periods and all the issues and topics. So I think, who knows what I've been smoking, but I think there's going to be something original in all parts of the book, like more about interfaith relations. I've got Ghazi's Defending Borders. I've got Mystics Without Borders, that Michel Balivet phrase that's so memorable. I mean, they're at the same time. This narrative complexity is one of the things that's going on. I mean, that's just an example. And my most important contributions to Ottoman history are not about the 14th century. But because I didn't narrow down my vision and think that the way to solve all problems was to go, to look for the source about the 14th century that nobody else had found, but instead to broaden your frame of reference and have more of a comparative perspective to look at this in. I mean, maybe I'm crazy, but I think there's original stuff in all of the book.
No, I have no doubt that you'll get a very interesting perspective on. I'm just amazed by the courage and the challenge this represents. Just that I would try to avoid this.
It didn't take courage. I was just told I had to do it, and so.
Yeah, because you constantly go between something very specific, Fatma Aliye or Ahmed Bitat or Moulay Jadot-Son or James Redhouse.
I'll tell you another thing. Another person who really influenced me a lot was William McNeill. I had to, in order to become an important person at a state university, I hate to break the news to you guys, but you have to teach large numbers of students. So, and this was not happening right off the bat. So I figured I'd have to do something. And I was always interested in large-scale macro-conceptual approaches to the organization of knowledge, as well as in micro-focused empirical ones. And early on, we were trying to create a, incentive or motivation to introduce a world history course at my university. We invited William McNeill there to lecture. He was in his prime in those days, and it was very impressive. He said, it's historical analysis, a study in large pattern recognition. And in terms of he said that world history is no more impossible than it's impossible to have a map of the world as opposed to, New York City or the Columbia campus. It's just a question of the scale on which you operate. And some people would offer wild criticisms of world history as being, from 50,000 feet too abstract and all this kind of stuff. But his analogy was from geography, mine is from zoom lens photography. You can zoom in and find, deeply empirical illustrations of your major themes. Well, in the Dien Shuai incident in Egypt in 1906, that's one of the things in my world history book. And when the Latin American historian taught the world history course, he used something about the Zapatista rebellion in Mexico to illustrate the same kind of point. So, I mean, to me, it's not impossible.
No, I'm sure, and you'll prove it to us. I mean, I'm not worried about that. But I have another question that's kind of, what does it mean, the Ottoman Empire? I mean, is it a unit of analysis that makes sense? Especially, if you talk about the center, if you talk about the state structure, if you talk about the dynasty, if you talk about the ramifications of power, sure, there's something like the Roman Empire that works. But if you go deeper into the social, regional realities, does it make sense to talk about something that includes, say, Yemen and Bosnia and Algiers and the Caucasus at the same time? Does it really boil down to some kind of a manageable animal?
Well, that depends on your wrangling capacities, I gather. But anyway, just to offer some examples, one that has come up in my research, one of the things I was highly interested in was the question of whether or not non-Muslims living under Ottoman rule regarded the Ottoman rule as legitimate. The Jewish rabbis would have, of course, they were used to living under kings, and if I'm not mistaken, one of their axioms is the king's law is the law, and the law of the Jewish law is the other law. Anyway, the king's law is the law. And as long as the Jews were protected in the Ottoman Empire, they were highly supportive. I've since found out that I think the man's name is Antaramian, my information about Armenians is not as good, but apparently sanctification of the Sultan's rule was part of the Armenian liturgy, if I'm retaining what I think he said correctly. And certainly under the Greek Orthodox, of course, being under heathen rule was punishment for their sins, but they made hay out of all that punishment. If you look at the request they sent to get barats for their new patriarchs, and of course this developed over the centuries. Dosson has one of the latest ones in his book, from the most recent, in 1789, and it has page after page after page of minutiae about the internal workings of Orthodox religious institutions and communities, the sort of taxes they should pay, the rights of the ecclesiastical authorities over the laity, all this kind of stuff. The Ottoman Sultan could not possibly, the Padishah of Islam could not possibly have known all those nuts and bolts about the wishes and desires of the Greek hierarchy. But by then it was part of this, and there were also public rituals. Another thing that Dosson turned me on to is sort of ceremonial occasions during the year when the Greek patriarch would request permission for the Easter celebrations, and there would be dancing in the streets and all this kind of stuff. And then the Armenian patriarch would request permission for the non-Muslims to make wine. And these were like ceremonial enactments of the protective relationship between the Padishah of Islam and all these other people. So yeah, and even out of Snezhana Buzov before she crashed and burned. Well, I'm sorry, that's a terrible way to speak about what happened to her, but she, if I'm not mistaken, she had found things in Catholic monastery records in, what would now be places like Croatia and Slovenia, where they were relying on the protection of the Padishah for their monasteries and things like that. Less so in Yemen, I don't doubt, but when you get out to Algeria, they were very much interested to the extent that I have information about it, in maintaining their relationships, you know, and including the right to recruit janissaries in Anatolia.
Yeah, okay, I'm not, it's just that this is a problem I have because I have always worked on Istanbul, right? And it's my mea culpa, if you want it. And I've always said that.
That's what you have in common with Dosson. That's what he really knew about.
Right.
He told.
But that's what we all know about, most. I mean, I think there is a tendency of Istanbul to kind of overshadow the rest of the empire.
Surely you don't believe that.
The moment you talk about the state, you are voicing what the state is saying, and the state is saying it from the perspective of the center. But Dosson, it's a fantastic source, and I think you oppose it to another contemporary source, which is Choiseul-Gouffier's Voyage pittoresque de la Grèce. Right? But there's another one, I think, that is also contemporary. It's Melling's Voyage pittoresque.
Well, Melling is a later generation.
Illustrate. Well, yeah.
Yeah, 1819 or something.
That's
was
the
dead by
publication.
then.
He was working for Hatice Sultan, Selim's sister.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
So they're kind of contemporary, and I like this. The Tableau Général is this, as you call it, taxonomy of the empire. It's kind of an enlightened way of analyzing. Look, this is enlightening Europe about the empire. I think that's a great title. Choiseul-Gouffier is, on the contrary, about reviving Greece and those who have been downtrodden by the Ottomans. And Melling is this totally aesthetic vision of the Bosphorus and of Istanbul. It's so weird, but there is such a concentration of publications around those years at the turn of the 19th century that are fascinating.
Well, Dosson didn't think he was writing a book about Istanbul. He thought he was writing something that would today be called a political science book or public administration manual. The purpose of it was to tell the king of the Lutherans everything he needed to know to manage his relationships with the Padishah of Islam, or beziehungsweise the king of the Anglicans or the king of the French Catholics, and in other words, European rulers and statesmen. This book was designed to give them everything they needed to know for practical purposes in relations with the Ottoman Empire. That's really what it is. My mistake, the only serious mistake I made in the book, English edition, was the title. Instead of Mourad Dosson and his masterpiece, I should have said Mourad Dosson on Law and the State, because that's really, I didn't want to, originally I was going to say Mourad Dosson and the title, but I didn't want to have things that had to be italicized different ways in a single book title. So I took that out and put it in masterpiece, but that's too much of an old-timey, life and works kind of thing. I should have just said that he's writing on Law and the State and the Ottoman Empire. That is it.
And on religion, because law obviously is religious. Yeah, but I mean, he's also interested in everyday practices of religion. He's interested in the folklore,
Well, he's a sociologist or anthropologist before the time.
Right.
And that's why I did so many of those passages that are headed Mourad Speaks. In fact, I had hopes that the Brill people would, maybe even market those in some way to facilitate their use in the classroom. Because if you want original source passages that you could show your students about things like the Rifai Zikr or the Mevludi Sharif on the ceremonial performance of that, or his things about marriages. He's got an account of marriages both in the palace and in an ordinary family. He's got a narrative about celebrating the birth in the imperial harem. These are memorable texts, and I translated them all in there. So the book's really got three kinds of material. I discussed those texts. I reproduced all of the visual imagery, and I have these Mourad Speaks passages that are sort of like box texts that I had hoped people would find and use in the classroom.
And it's going to be translated into Turkish, published, I think, at the end of the year by İş Bankası.
Inshallah, İş Kultur.
İş Bankası Kültür Yayınları or whatever.
Kali baptized.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, I'm still amazed that, nobody should have touched it until you did, because it's such a monumental work.
Well, see,
It's
the
so
attitude
attractive.
that people had was to mine it for facts. And also, don't forget, this book, there was so much interest in this in the 1780s in Europe that it was published simultaneously in two formats.
Yeah.
The big volumes with pages big enough to carry the engravings, some of which fold out. There's one of these that's so like 2 meters wide, and then a 7 volume folio edition with few to none of the engravings. And what most people see is only that edition. So most people don't even know. I was 20 years into research on this, or at least 20 years in being interested in it before I ever found the large volumes. I went to a library where I called them out to look up something, and they brought out these big volumes. I said, oh no, that's the wrong thing. And then I looked on the spine of it, it said Tableau General de l'Empire Ottoman. It was an accident that I discovered the large volumes.
But now you have it, right?
Well, Tom Goodrich's father had bought him a ticket for paying $175 in the, right after World War II in the Dutch bookstore. Yeah, he forced them on me because he knew I would do something with it. I was so humiliated. I was paying him tuck seats for several years.
But so if we go back to the earlier period, that is the bureaucracy, because I think there's a connection there too, because what's his name, Dawson is talking about is already the transformation of the Ottoman bureaucracy at the end of the 18th century. And I think your bureaucracy book has one of the engravings, the one showing the katips, right?
Yeah.
So,
okay.
I mean, there was already a connection there. It was
Well,
written.
I knew about it. In fact, it was while I was working on that book that I had that accidental thing of going to a different library and they brought out big volumes. That's how I discovered that the big volumes existed.
So, about the bureaucracy, when you said Sherif Mardin made me do it, I think it's very interesting, especially because I think Sherif Mardin has had such an impact on Ottoman history, on late Ottoman history, without being a historian. And I think that's a guarantee of success in some cases. His genesis of young Ottoman thought and whatever. When I look at it today, he's done work that historians never did, looking into the works, the writings of these individuals in ways that historians never did. So I think that was really a very good push from him to tell you, go for the bureaucracy.
Yeah, you see, when I was a beginning graduate student, there were 4 books that had come out in recent years, and I thought I'd never get them all read. There was Martin's Genesis of Young Ottoman Thought, Bernd Lewis's Emergence of Modern Turkey, Niazi Berke's Emergence of Secularism in Turkey, and Roderick Davison's Reforming the Ottoman Empire, 1856 to 1876. Those 4, I thought I just never get those read. In fact, I can sing them up on the shelf in the library. Oh gosh, I know what I'll ever do about those. And of course, in those days, I had all of these anxieties that young graduate student might have. I thought I was going to run out of ideas. I was afraid people would steal my ideas if I had any. And it turns out nobody steals my ideas. I can't even give them away. Yeah, so if you ever feel like you had anxieties as a junior scholar, but I mean, in terms of running out of ideas, it's been quite the opposite. And partly it's because it's going into a field that was not as intensively picked over as, British history and things like that.
So the Sigil records you discovered?
Okay,
For
well,
your PhD, right?
yeah, it was one of the summers before I took my general exams, I was in Stanford Shaw's office at Harvard, and this guy who looked like a movie star came in, and Shaw introduced me to Schermerhorn, and he said I was trying to pick out a dissertation topic. And Martin said, without missing a beat, a lot of social scientists are interested in bureaucracy nowadays. Okay, so for the next 25 years of my life, I worked on bureaucracy. And then after that, when I saw him again, I said, look, I did what you told me to do. What do you want me to do? And in the process, you see other influences of the period. This is mid-60s, annal school, social history, quantification. For all I knew, those all were just, like triplets or something. I had no idea that they could pull in different directions. And then I had the dumb luck of, I think the first book I ever read, complete book I ever read in Turkish was Midhat Sekol's little catalog of the archives, which was about 100 pages long. And that may be where I came across this phrase, Sicilian. And I thought, what the heck is that? A register of morals? Register of ethics? What is it? And so I asked to cease it. And then I was doing research at the Harji Archivi in the morning, and the Başbakan look in the afternoon, because we're right across the street from each other over there, Defter Dar look in those days. And I discovered the Harji also had Sicilian records, and they were individual envelopes with the original questionnaire that each bureaucrat filled out. A big sheet of paper, about like that, with columns and boxes, and then other supplementary documents put in there after they did it. And then across the street at Başbakan look, they had these big, big defters, monster defters. And turned out there's 92,000 people in them supposedly, or some number over 90,000. And my problem was that with the restrictions on research access, I could take 100 poses of microscope a year. Okay, a year. And so it was quite obvious to me that you could do some, Hollywood production number kind of a project where you got a big grant for $5 million and have a huge crowd of people working on this. But I knew people whose careers had crashed and burned, or sort of had ideas that there were people in American academia whose careers had crashed and burned because they started things like that never finished. And with conditions of archival access as they were in Turkey at the time, it was clearly out of the question. So how did I get enough of those out of there to do a study, that I could quantify? And then the next problem was to make sure I could explain and do myself all the quantification. And the hardest thing I ever wrote was the methodological appendices at the end of the Ottoman social history book, which have all of that mathematics. I'm not a math whiz, but I got sort of low level. I mean, I could wrangle that with great difficulty and with fear in my mouth the whole time. I've still got all the original printouts. I just lived in fear that somebody was going to expose me as, for doing it wrong.
It never happens.
But anyway, that's how that started. Of course, by the time I was approaching that up in the middle 80s, people were saying, quantification is reductionist, it's so terrible. You're not really going to do that, are you? You need thick description, which is that term of Clifford Geertz's. Well, you can spot a numerophobic social scientist a mile away. there was one, but because I realized that the things I could quantify were, not really a very full-fledged picture of these bureaucrats. So between the early dissertation stage and the later phase of the research, by then I had also done research in the the Yıldız ever I could in the archives. And at great cost of psychological wear and tear and tremendous amounts of wear on my dictionaries, I'd gotten accustomed enough to the Hamidian Resmi Kitabet. So when I needed to read Inal's and biographic encyclopedias, I could do it. Earlier on in my research, when I needed to read them, I couldn't. But once I got used to the Hamidian Resmi Kitabet, I could. And also I discovered the Ashdede memoirs. This incredible, naive dervish bureaucrat. Life is just a series of things that happen to him, and he goes home and writes them down. This is sort of like worm's eye view of, and everything that could happen to an island bureaucrat happened to him sooner or later.
But I think this qualification was really revolutionary. I mean, apart from economic history, okay, the Balkans and whatever, and their qualification was very problematic. It was cherry picking, and they already had an idea of what they wanted to reach, the price revolution, whatever. But in a topic that is not purely economic or financial, I think you're the first to have come up with this idea of crunching numbers, of having even prosopography, which is now very fashionable.
You see, a lot of this data is very low order quantitative data. It's nominal or ordinal data. And so quantifying it is not all that hard. It's only when you get to the salaries and things that are in specific numbers that you can have more complicated kinds of computations. And then I had to deal with the things that the problems of computing both averages and medians, means and medians, and then what do you do if you've got factors which appear to distort your seniority distribution in public? So I had to learn how to do standardization of your calculations. And there was a book called Blaylock's Social Statistics, which was my Bible for that kind of thing back in that period. And I sure did sweat a lot over that thing. And so I was and then when I got the salary data, then I needed a price indicator to compare it to. Well, there was none of that. Well, there's one who's your relative who did the thing about the Istanbul statistics?
Oh, Vedant Eldem.
Yeah, Vedant Eldem. Yeah, there was one. It was a little bit of cost of living data in there, but I had to spend months collecting commodity price quotations from Istanbul, from newspapers of the period, to compute a proxy for a price index to compare, how that fluctuates compared to how the salaries fluctuate. And one of the conclusions this revealed was, the Ottomans, the sultans had trouble with political opposition in the 1860s and 70s, and again in the 1890s and later. But in between, not so much. Was this because Abdul Hamid was so repressive? No. The prices peaked, grain prices peaked in the early 70s, went down into the early 90s, and then started to go back up again. Well, that's terrible if you're a peasant or a merchant or somebody who's but if you're a bureaucrat with a more or less fixed salary, or at least your salary does not fluctuate with market conditions, then you're getting better off. Just because you're staying flat, you're getting better off because the prices are going down. And then when they start to go back up again, political opposition reemerges.
Even today, I mean, there is not yet a systematic use made of the sigil. That is, people use the sigil to look for people they're looking for. I mean, you work on whatever pasha, whatever effendi, you go and try to find him. And I still can't find Osman Hamdi. How is it possible? I don't know. I mean, the guy is all over the place. He's not in the sigil.
Oh, well, Abdul Hamid Tarhan, he also was not going to let himself be caught writing with Celia involved. He would always respond that he would have to wait until he got back to Istanbul where he had his documents. He was too clever too.
You're right about the fact that the information qualitatively is not really enormous. Most of it is a sequence of positions and the salaries. But you still have that first paragraph about who the father is, where he was born, where he was or how he was educated, if they knew or whatever, you know. And the language is spoken.
Well, and whether you can do Tekelu or Kitabet.
Right. And this is the kind of thing that you would want to put into a huge database, and people are not doing it. I mean, I know why, because it's very time-consuming, whatever. But
yeah, you know, whatever it took for Şevket Mahmud to produce his Ottoman monetary history, and I have to conclude that there was a large staff of people working on that, and somebody behind the scenes like Tusiad, or I can't imagine some large, powerful, wealthy organization that wanted that information, subsidized that and made it happen. That is the kind of thing that it would take that to do with the Siciliafal Defteres what they are capable of doing. And of course, monetary history and history of prices, that has practical value. And this kind of thing, I mean, I can picture Tusiad, for example, subsidizing and I know that he was drawn back to Turkey to work on this, because at that stage he had a position in Villanova, teaching position in Villanova, which, you know, not all that great. But anyway, so I know there was a stage when he was, you know, cutting loose. He didn't want to take on more responsibility in the Turkish Studies Association here in the USA because I don't know what's going on.
I mean, the only person who's done some work in that direction is Abdülhamit Kırmızı, if you know him. Abdülhamit Kırmızı, your generation, I would think.
Beyond my generation, I believe, yeah.
Well, kind of, you know. And
provincial governors.
Provincial governors, and also the distribution, the ethnic/religious distribution of, but still, it's more sampling than the systematic. I mean, it's not as huge as you thought at the beginning. It's not 92,000 people, it's 30,000 or whatever, but still, it's a huge number. And some of the stuff is unfortunately missing. I mean, there's nothing about the family, nothing about being married or having kids or whatever. It stops at the individual and the individual's career. But still, the tiny bit you have at the top is still so significant if it could be crunched into some kind of a database to provide. But it's a lot of work, and as you said, I mean, this is something that could be only a collective kind of.
Yeah, it would take a huge.
Right. I mean, you used also the Salnames.
Yeah.
And I know that because I was the research assistant who did some of the research from
because
back in the 80s.
I was only had allowed 100 shots of microfilm a year. I took advantage of the fact that the Başbakanlık archives had what looked like a complete section, a complete set of the Devlet Salnameleri up there on the shelf. And I had the photographer. What was that man's name? Jamal Shun. Yeah, it's photographic atelier right there next to the Başbakanlık Archive. And so I would be going over there every day, carrying over a few more of these Devlet Salnameleri, and to get him to just photograph the relevant pages. I had a thick stack of photographs. And while I was walking out of the front door of the Başbakanlık and around to the side, go in the interest of his place, some saucy tart would be sashaying in there to have him take pictures of her for some girly magazine. No, I'm not kidding.
But even the Salname, that's good stuff. And again, people use it only for punctual research. I mean, there should be some kind of an institution that would do the number crunching for whatever is crunchable. And there's plenty of that material. It's just not happening. It's just not happening.
Well, of course, one of the things that's so weird about all this is that the impulse to produce Tabakat literature has certainly never died out, and Turkey is one of the places where it has gone on the most strongly. And people are, I don't know if it, at least, the last time I was looking for this kind of material, people like Mücella Ali Çankaya, he did his Mülkiye ve Mülkiyeliler in 5 volumes or something like that. And I tell you, if you were used to the format of the Sicilian question, you can tell that when people who worked as officers or bureaucrats are asked to write the story of their life, they reproduce that format.
That's true, yeah.
It's quite clear that has become a template in their mind. Of course, they may add other stuff or stuff that's not asked in there, but their outline, that is their outline that they go with.
Definitely, but I think it's a vicious circle in the sense that the template was created on the basis of what the bureaucratic culture of the Tanzimat had imagined to be the itemized version of their life, of their careers.
Well, instantly, another thing that I'm developing a keener sense of is sort of like the intricacies of Ottoman modernity. All these, many of these things, it seems quite dated now, like, I don't know, the whalebone corsets and stuff like that. There's stages in the Ottoman assimilation of the modernity of the day. And in many respects, the Ottomans were not behind. They were quite up to date about a lot of this stuff. And I think the Sigillia Dosciolata are another example of that, because this is just exactly the period when civil service and the idea of a professionalization of government clerk offices was taking off in other countries. I mean, in the United States, up to the Civil War, they had the spoil system. When Lincoln wanted to get people to vote for him, he promised somebody to be the postmaster in this place or the surveyor in that place, whether they had any competence in it or not. And of course, now Trump wants to crank that, to reinstitute that back. He does. But the evolution of civil service, the Ottomans were au jour in that.
Yeah, but I think at some point we have to give the floor to the audience.
Must do.
Because most people here are Ottoman historians or historians that are in one way or another interested in the Ottoman Empire. Not necessarily all historians. This is my thing, But so if there are questions, issues that you would like to raise, let's open the discussion, the conversation, the piano playing to the rest of the room. Yes.
Hi.
Yasmin.
Thank you, Professor Findley. So obviously you've taught for so many years.
You may want to introduce yourself.
Oh, okay. So my name is Yasemin Akçayınar. I'm a 7th-year PhD candidate here at Columbia's History Department. I work with Professor Shen. Obviously you've taught for several decades survey courses on the Ottoman Empire, and I wonder, in these courses you've taught, which books have you taught with? And obviously there is, Imber and Quaiter's sort of chronological book, Finkel's book. What did you find unsatisfying in these books, and what would you that made you want to write your own history?
Can I add a question very much related to what Yasemin has asked? Yes. The last decade actually has witnessed these 3 textbooks on Ottoman history: Mark David Baer,
Ottoman Dynasty,
Howard, and I forgot the third one, in Canada. I wonder what your impressions are about those oldest and most recent textbooks.
Let's just put it this way.
Being recorded, right?
Yeah.
This is let's just put it this way. They did not retard me or stop me in my plans to write a book. David Howard is a nice little man, but he never taught at a major university. And he did he ever publish his dissertation? I was asked who I thought David Baer's, who he had written his book for, what he thought his audience was. And after reading the book, I responded, I have no idea who he thinks his audience was. And it has got elementary errors in it about something that he calls primogeniture, and also unigeniture, which is even worse. It's time to stop repeating that. I can't explain. Yeah, so, and so, that's what I can say about those two books. Yasmin, does that answer your question, or was there more to it?
I'm also thinking, which books did you actually
Oh,
use in your
yes.
so far?
Well, it was always a problem. And I found, frankly, of course, early on I used the Analogic textbook, which came out in '73. It's actually the first book I ever reviewed in print. And, but you know, after a while I couldn't keep using that. So I sort of segued over to this and that and the other thing. And the one that I felt the most satisfactory in the long run was Ember, the best, frankly. Finkel's, frankly, I never managed to read it all the way to the end. And I think she was just having too much fun when she wrote it.
Too much what? Sorry.
Fun.
Oh, okay, yeah, right. And that's a crime, right?
No, it's not a crime, but you don't necessarily want your readers to think that. And I don't mean to criticize it. It has been out for 20 years now, so. And if I didn't adopt it in my course for all that whole time, that tells you something right there. And what I had to rely on, in addition to those things, was a primary source for the students. And the ones I used over the years, and boy, howdy do I have intricate handouts prepared on these, are Lady Mary Wortley Montague's Turkish Letters and the Dankoff book, Intimate Life of an Ottoman State.
That's a gem.
Yeah, both of those, and for the original paper assignment, of course, I would alternate and one of those. And of course, both of them I had to have spoon feeder handouts about a lot of the details in them. Now, another book that would be extremely useful and would not require a spoon feeder handout is Holiday Edeb's The Clown and His Daughter. I mean, that is the English version of that book is the original, and it's the better, and doesn't require any explanation at all. But you can only use it for something about the late period. And then for the late period, as the years went by, I would start using something like, Jane Hathaway's Arab, part about the Arab provinces of the Ottoman Empire. I was using that, and I would try to have 4 or 5 things on the reading list, and it was things like that.
Yes.
Well, thank you first of all for this wonderful conversation. I'm not a historian. I actually
Nobody's perfect.
I do my PhD in German literature, and I'm currently working on a project on Ottoman and Turkish connection with the Turkish encounter with the German-speaking world. And I read this essay that you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation on Ahmet Mithat Efendi's travel log. So as a literary scholar, I'm wondering if you could speak to the role of literature in your work as a historian, and how you engage literary resources.
Well, every now and then God chooses me for something. And one of the first times this happened was that as a freshman at Yale, this, naive scholarship boy with my heart in my mouth, just by dumb luck, I had to have a student job, part-time job, because there was no scholarships. And I thought I'd be, carrying dishes in the dining hall. But at the end of the first week, they asked me, did I want to work for Professor? And I said, okay. And they said they had a professor who's a bursary boy, as they call these students. Yale students were Yale men, but if you were on a scholarship, you were a bursary boy. Okay. And well, I'll take whatever's dished out to me. I was asked, did I want to work for a professor? So sure. And they said, can you type? I was floored. The only question I was ever asked at Yale about my education is, can you type? As it turned out, I didn't know how to type. So I was sent over to meet this man. His name was Cleant Brooks. He was from the South, and he liked having bursary boys from the South. That was my other qualification. He at the time, I don't know if the name means anything to you now. A lot of people in the literature program here would probably want to know how to go piss on his grave, but be that as it may. Back in the day, he was at the summit of literary scholarship in the USA. And I never took a course with him, but for the next 4 years, I typed his manuscripts, draft after draft, and did all kinds of other jobs for him. And so by osmosis, I assimilated his literary method. And this is one of the big things. I thought my Turkey, Islam, Islam and Modernity, the 2010 Yale Press book, I thought that was going to replace Bernard Lewis's book, but of course, once again, nobody noticed. And there are analyses of 10 different writers from the beginning of the modern genres in Turkey, starting with Namık Kemal and coming up to Orhan Pamuk's Kar. I have sequentially analyses of these works of fiction. Of course, they're not sources on their times, but they are sources about what people were thinking about. You see, until very about times in Turkey, Turkish writers didn't write about, space travel or stuff like that. They wrote about what was going on around them. And so it turns out that they're really very good sources. And so I've got, for Namık Kemal, I've got a quick little thing about, one play, one poem, and a novel, the Hürriyet Kasidesi, and Intibah and Vatan. And then for the Hamidian period, it's a comparative essay on both Ahmet Medhat's Mushahadat and Fatma Alia's Muhazarat. Some people think there's no connection between those two books, but those were morphologically identical one-word titles. And it turns out there is. You just have to read both of them and take intricate notes and compare both of them. And then for the early Republic period, it's 2 books by Holiday Adib. Then Ahmet Hamdi Tanpınar's Saatleri Ayarlama Enstitüsü. But of course, I really wanted to do more than one of his books. And then for the period, and then Orhan Kemal's Bereketli Topraklar Üzerinde. Now, that really is a revelation about things going on in Turkey in a quite different way. And then for the next period after that, I had gotten to be friends with Adalet Ağaoğlu because she was the only one of those writers that was alive at that time. And I had a chance to meet her and her husband. In fact, I arranged for Ohio State to give her an honorary doctorate. And I ended up writing about her Üçlüsü. Her Üçlüsü that ends with the Higher, I think is the title of the last one. And then of course, by that time, Orhan Pamuk had won the Nobel Prize, and so I couldn't have a book without having him in there. So it turns out that a lot of his books are not necessarily about what's going on around him at the time, but the Kar Roman really is. And so that was a lifesaver for me. I put that in right at the end of my book. And I've got these sort of, what Clint Brooks would have called new criticism analyses of these books. It was new, 60 years ago, but it is a sort of explication de texte type of analysis.
But I think that's very true. That's a very good point. I mean, historians are terrible when it comes to literature. They don't know it, or they think they know it, which is even worse. But what is terrible, at least in Turkey, is historians of literature are not historians. I mean, and they're incapable of contextualizing the material they work on. They get lost in details and whatever without bringing in what could become the essence of a communication between historians and plus, because what we forget, and that's what you said, it's not just about what is what they represent, but it's also that they were read. I mean, I'm working on these diaries of a prince. He spent most of his time copying poems from Tercüman Hakikat or Vatan Mersiyesi or Hürriyet Kasidesi or Rüya, the whole thing in his books. They were obsessed with this. So it's so important. It's so important, and we were missing that.
Well, anyway, I mean, if you want to see what I did with these, the one thing that would probably tell you the most in just a few pages of reading is the comparison of Ahmed Findley's Mushahadat and Fatma Alia's Muhazarat, because they really are, it really is a literary duel going on between the two books.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I'm always curious about learning more about the relationships of those Ottomanists being in the Ottoman archives back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and the Turkish scholars back then. I mean, we learned so much from Heath Lowry or Süreyya Fariki about Barkan or Ali Sahidioğlu. I'd like to hear whether you had
Süreyya Hoca and I are the same age, unfortunately for her. We were born in the same year. And I can, you know, when I was just telling them today, when I was, the first time I went to do research in the Ottoman archives, I started in a bedroom down in Ahırkapı that actually looked out on the Sea of Marmara. Arid in those days was located in the Köprülü Evi, and my bedroom actually looked out across the Sahil Yolu at the sea. And to go to work every morning, I would toil up past that little masjid with a dangling piece of tin off the roof, and up the slope to Sultan Ahmet, across that little garden between Sultan Ahmet and Hagia Sophia. And then down the slope and in to the Çeşme Kapısı, to the Başvakalet archives, when it was there right opposite the Vilayet. And the assistants would teach in the morning and come to do their research in the afternoon. So pretty much on a regular basis, we would see Nejat Gürünç, Halil Sahilioğlu, Mehmet Genç, and who was the communist? I think his name was Mehmet Çetin. They called him Mao Çetin in those days. I think he later turned from red to green, but you know, that sort of thing happens. And then at 5 o'clock, a lot of days we'd go out to have tea, and it was the same difference to go to Meseret Pastanesi on Ankara Caddesi, or go down to Taksim and get in a taxi and go up to Taksim to the Park Hotel Pastanesi. You could do one as easily as the other. Now, just try to do that now. And then on days when that didn't happen, I would wander off through over towards Nur Osmaniye, and the TBMM was right there on Ankara Caddesi in those days. But nationalism was at such a pitch, I was afraid to go in there. The funny thing was, if I had gone in, I would have met several of the faculty members who are now on the faculty at Ohio State University. So we have a lot of Turkish faculty members, including some who were active in the Turkish, National Turkish Student Association there. But anyway, I would head on over towards Nur Osmaniye, go through the garden of Nur Osmaniye. I never liked that enough to go inside and see the mosque. I still to this day never seen the mosque, which was a mistake, but that forecourt in front of it was such a big turnoff. And so then I'd wander through the Kapılı Çarşı, and out the, if I didn't stop at any of the stops in there, I'd go out the other side through the Sahaflar. A lot of days I'd stop and get involved in conversation in the Sahaflar. And Ismail Evrensal has written a book about the Sahaflar, in which he talks about people. One of the people he dedicates it to is what was the man's name?
Ismail Manab.
Yeah, Ismail Manab with the Dilman Kitab. The last time I was in Istanbul, I went through there and Ismail greeted me like an old friend. He had not forgotten me. So a lot of days I'd stop in the Sahaflar for a conversation. And if I didn't, I would head on over towards the Edebiyat Fakültesi and go up to the third floor. And then I would face the momentous choice about whether to go down that hallway or that hallway. This one led to the Tarih bölümü, where the Tarih asistanları were. And this one led to the Edebiyat bölümü, where the person I knew was Kaplan Bey and his assistant, İnci Engin'ün. İnci's sister, Mine, was studying engineering at Georgia Tech in Atlanta when I was just, getting into this field, and people introduced me to her, and she said, when I go to Istanbul to meet her family, and if I ever became able to speak the Turkish language, an art that is, I suppose one has to admit, kind of come and gone over the years, but anyway, if I ever got good at it, it was due to the fact that the Enginus invited me to lunch every Sunday afternoon. And we would sit there and eat the good food and talk Turkish all afternoon. And then I would go home with my head throbbing. Yeah, well, Inji was really into the nationalism thing in those days, and so this was a sacrifice she made.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, you asked.
Thank you. I'm Hazal. I'm a postdoctoral fellow in Armenian Studies at Michigan University. Thank you for this fascinating conversation. I want to come back to Ottoman bureaucracy because it's my fascination. I spent a few years, like now 30, to understand the Ottoman bureaucracy. And I want to ask, what are the challenges in studying that, except Schermerhorn? When I read the countless correspondences between the center and provincial officials, the desire to come up with a bureaucracy to keep undesirable subjects out in a later period in the 19th century, I often come across the difference between the ambition and reality, but the intention and
No
the
kidding,
outcome.
yes, no kidding.
So I was wondering if you had a similar thought about
Oh,
the
yes,
field you're
no
working
kidding.
on.
There was always inadequate resources for what they were doing. And of course, it has a lot to do with things like having to pay, every time the Russians beat them in a war, they had to pay the Russians for, for beating them in the war. And, Doston has no sense that there's anything wrong in the Ottoman Empire. He doesn't think it's decadent. He doesn't think anything shabby or run down. And, when he talks about the comparison of the arts et métiers, for example, he says, oh, well, a few things like mirror making. He doesn't even mention clocks or any of that stuff. He doesn't think I'm really backward at all. But by the Young Turk period, the Baba Ali has got stovepipes sticking out through holes in the windows, to judge from the newspaper photographs I produced in one of my books. So and of course, the fact of the matter is the Ottoman Empire was overextended. The provinces were many times bigger than provinces of other contemporary states. Of course, there was never enough of material resources to meet all their needs. I'm getting more impressed as I look at illustrations for this new book. I'm getting more impressed at how much they accomplished with what they did have. For example, I was looking for photographs about the railroad and the Hejaz Railroad. Well, so I found one of, I got a technician to combine two of these into an over and under thing. One of them is a train station that was built in Medina, and the other one is this train rolling down the track somewhere in Palestine. And, it's impressive by the 19th century standard. For my illustration about World War I, I want to show something where the Ottomans were, at least having a good day. And not Çanakkale this time. Let's see if we can find something different. So I contacted somebody who knew about the Irak Seferleri, and I got some photographs about the Kut Muhasarası, and there was one in there of Ottoman officers had captured rapid-fire English cannon and turned them back and were using it to fire against the English. And he's got an inscription at the top that says he came to learn then. Zat Eldem. He talked like a Gary Chapman or something like that. So I think, you know, their achievements in terms of Ottoman modernity and the fact that you know, people were living in unpainted houses. My relatives in the South didn't have their houses painted. They're not different. You know, everything looked shabby and small and primitive in the 19th century, or an awful lot of things did by comparison. So it is true the empire was too big. The provinces were too too overstretched, and they you know, in terms of, I think one of the problems that's going on in this period is people like Gold Pasha are coming down there to the Harbiya and teaching them what amounts to Prussian military doctrine. You try to apply Prussian military doctrine in an empire that does not have the compact territorial mass and the most solid, almost solid black set of railroad lines. I once saw a railroad map in a German train that I couldn't make out a bit because it was just all black. There you couldn't tell it looked like there was just railroads everywhere. Well, the Ottoman Empire is not like that at all. And one of the problems they have is they're relying on German military doctrine in the last place in the world where it can be applied. I think that's one of the things. I think that's one of my findings about World War I. Actually, I don't think other people have made that point as clearly as they could. But yes, you're right. There's always the reach always exceeds the grasp.
Thanks for this great conversation. My name is Ali. I'm an 8th grade student at the Department of Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies. I have two questions that are kind of related. The first one is, you've seen trends in Ottoman historiography shift over the decades. So where do you, what interests you the most about the current state of historiography? You know, what excites you about where the historiography is and where it's going? And the second one is, with so many books under your belt, you are still teeming with energy and passion for this field. So, you know, it's a personal question. What keeps you going?
Well, I don't know. There's a passage in the Bible about the wicked shall flourish. That's not all there is to the passage, but I would just say so far I've been getting away with it. Yeah. It continues about how they should be cut down, but all I can say is that that's happened yet. I don't know, it's dumb luck, partly, and long distance swimming is the other thing I really am into. And I was never an athlete, could never do any sports, couldn't throw a ball or hit a ball or make a basket. Somehow my poor old mother managed to get me swimming lessons until I was 8 years old. And by the time I was in high school, I discovered it didn't tire me. And if I just paced myself, I got to see how long I could keep going. And the next thing I knew, I was swimming the 50 lengths of the pool or something like that. You know, certainly not fast, but it's just luck. Well, I'll tell you another thing I noticed about Bernard Lewis in his later years, back when I was still able to respect him. Well, you know, people in Turkish studies were the last to give up on him. Yeah. One thing I noticed about him, you know, he was like a lot of men of his generation, this big, hot stomach. But he had a combination of brains and energy that was unusual. And I've certainly kept myself in better physical condition than he is. And I don't know how my energy level compares to him with the last time I saw him. Well, I remember seeing on a certain occasion, charge up a flight of stairs, for example. I don't know how my energy level compares with him, and I'm certainly as smart as he was. But it's partly dumb luck. Longevity runs in my family. I had a great aunt who lived to be 95, and I remember her once telling my mother, the years between 80 and 90 can be wonderful. My mother didn't believe it, and it didn't become true for her, alas and alack. But it was true for this great aunt. I had a lot of relatives who lived to great ages, but in general were not in shape to say anything like that in their 80s. This old lady was.
And about new trends and achievements in historiography?
Oh, well, what worries me the most about it is proliferating so much that it's now finally getting impossible to keep up with it. When I started, Ottoman history was an exotic subject. And I don't think it is anymore. In fact, that's one of the things my editor wants me to do, things to differentiate my textbook with a preface that will really pitch it to a potentially more than academic audience. And one of the things I'm putting in there is this idea that this has gone from being an exotic subject plagued by ideological constraints and incompatible research agendas to a mainstream subject that's characterized by, well, it needs to be characterized by intellectual honesty, including facing up to the failures as well as the successes. But there really are real triumphs. This is one of the major stories of the human experience.
Yes, I'm Nili. I'm a postdoc here at South Savannah Center. You said that there was a bit of exotism around Ottoman studies at the time, and you also talked about your entry to the field. So I was wondering, how was that at the period? Because for Turkish nationals, there seemed to be, for others, an organic line between your identity and the work you do as an Ottoman historian. But for you, how did it develop and how others viewed you?
Yeah, I would like to add to this a personal, a friend who used to be an instructor at Boğaziçi. It's a post-Ottoman story because his family was from Albania. So he went to Albania, to Tiran, and he wanted to visit his hometown. And he went to the desk, to the concierge, said, I want to go to such and such place. I'm not naming it because there might be somebody from there. And the clerk at the desk said, why? So my question is, why Ottoman history? In the 60s. So that completes your question.
What do I tell my story about in a place like this now? No.
No, that's...
Well, a genealogical website has recently informed me that that Mete-Han was my 75th great-grandfather. So I think the best answer I can give you is that, while I didn't realize it, Mete-Han has been doing spirit manipulation on me from the top of Mount Ertuğ all my life. At the time, however, as far as I knew, as an undergraduate, I wasn't sure I wanted to go to graduate school. I wasn't sure what to do. And the things that interested me the most were history, literature, and language. So I wanted a way to combine all of those. And by window shopping, I selected to apply to Middle East Studies programs. And then when I talked to somebody in the program that accepted me, I was told that if you want to be a historian, you should work in Turkish studies because they had these archives in Istanbul. And at this stage, the other countries didn't, or they were not comparable, because that's still true to a great degree. So that was how it started. And it just turned out, for all I knew, this could have been some terrible mistake. And of course, there was times when I was having to rely so much on Red House and Dosal. Well, who are they and how do they, how did they acquire what seems to me like so much knowledge? And what's going to happen to me? Is my career going to go down the toilet because I, relied on these guys? That was a start. That kind of anxiety was the start of my curiosity about their careers. And I published on Red House in '79 and on Doso in 2019, which is an indication of the difference in the scale of the two projects. But anyway, that's both a 75 generations long and a 1 generation long story of how I got into the field.
Other questions, comments? Yes.
Hi, my name is Aisha Baltajoğlu-Bremer. I am one of horticulture students from Ohio State. It is a pleasure to be here and to celebrate your scholarship, but my question is going to be about another part of your career, which is training and educating graduate students. Any word of wisdom for the graduate students who are in the audience, but also for those of us who are now young scholars training or trying to train graduate students? What can you share in terms of what to do and what not to do?
Well, I'm as much as I appreciate the question, I'm not sure I have a ready answer in terms of what to do and what not to do. The best thing I can say is that when I was hired at Ohio State, the makings of a program that could support graduate training in Ottoman studies was not there. My predecessor had introduced the teaching of Ottoman history in 1935, but he was an enthusiast who never learned the language, and et cetera, and et cetera. I had the skills, but there was not the infrastructural support. So I spent the first half of my career trying to bring all that into existence. As a first-year assistant professor, I started agitating for changes in the library and raising money to buy Turkish books and getting language instruction introduced. I actually personally had to teach the first language course. It's a proof of concept thing. Boy, I talk about dancing on your hind legs. The TA who helped me certainly didn't think much of my Turkish language skills. Well, and so I spent the first half of the year of my career getting to the point where we could have people like Aisha there. And so consequently, I have not trained a great number of graduate students. It's really not impressive at all compared to the numbers that, people at some other universities have trained. But one upshot of this is that because it took so long to get them, that I had this incredible emotional investment in them. And I really felt like I would just do anything for them. And one of the rewards of it is that the people would show up. You might imagine they were attracted to study with me because they knew about my work on bureaucracy or something like that. Well, they all, to my great surprise, they had things that they wanted to work on that in some cases I didn't even think there would be enough materials to do it. And yet they would prove me wrong. The most rewarding ones were people who they came in with an idea that they wanted to do what I thought it was, even possible or not. And then the times when it didn't work out was when they needed too much help from me to try to help them find something to work on. Giving somebody a thesis topic is
one of the worst things.
Yeah, well, that's how I ended up with I've got to do Fatma Ali as my 7th book, because if I'd successfully given it to a young lady who's now disappeared into the sunset, and she could have launched a career with that. But that was what was so great about it for me, because it took so long. Once they were there, I had this feeling like I would just do anything for them.
Yes.
Thank you for the talk. My name is Fatma Deniz, and I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate at NYU. My advisor is Aisha Baltajoğlu-Bremer, so I think we have a chain here. My question is a generational one. Sometimes when we sit down with the colleagues, we try to imagine how it would have been like to become a scholar and Ottomanist like 50, 60 years ago, as much as we can. And you are someone who had a chance to closely observe how the field evolved over time. And I know that we have some advantages today as emerging scholars like technology, but we also have some challenges and problems ahead of us. And what do you think are the like challenges expecting us in the near future, or even today? And what do you think are the like some possible solutions to that?
Well, that's a brilliant question. And if I hadn't retired from teaching close to 10 years ago, I might be better able to answer it. This might be a good thing to talk off with Aisha. No, I don't mean to give you a shook. I wish I could give you the kind of answer that you would like to have from me, but I'm not sure I actually can.
I think that could be the topic of the whole meeting. It would be nice to have something like that, because obviously you do have advantages, but God, do you have challenges. It's a very hard world out there. We had it easy. Really, I mean, but the more I look at my students, at my PhDs, and the more I realize how lucky I was, Dumb luck is what you call it, but it was luck because, I mean, we were big fish in a small pond. And now...
Yeah, that's true.
Things have changed.
Like competitiveness?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so much out there. So much and so little to offer in terms of jobs, in terms of postdocs. It's really, I don't want to depress you, but I have already. But it's very difficult. It's very difficult. But
Maybe on that gloomy note.
yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I wanted to be honest. Me and my big mouth.
Have you ever swum across the Bosphorus?
Or the Dardanelles.
Did you ever hear of a man named Max Corder-Peter? He was one of the personalities of this field when I first got there. And Max was sort of this loose cannon, I guess you might say. And I personally did not swim across the Bosphorus, and neither did he. And I can tell you what I heard about that, which deterred me from attempting it. Apparently he went down, I think he was living, the year he was doing research there, he had a place for his family up in, it might have been all the way up to Sarajevo or someplace like that. Pretty far up the Bosphorus. Emirgan, yeah, I believe that's where it was. And so he decided he was going to swim across the Bosphorus. He just looked straight on, there's the other side. So he put on his bathing suit one day and went down to the water side and jumped in and started swimming. And the next thing he knew, he was not getting closer to the other side. And eventually the current swept him so far that he came to shore, and I think it was Fenerbahce. With nothing but a bathing suit.
But there are two historians who've done that. One is Tony Greenwood, did it on a regular basis, every whatever, it's a thing in Istanbul, and Noemi Levy-Aksu. Yeah.
Do we know from which point?
No, but I think it's the upper Bosphorus. I mean, it's around.
Presumably, you have to know what you're doing.
I think they do choose the narrowest part. I think it's around, Yeah. So there are at least two historians who've done it.
Yeah, I'm hoping to do it before I'm 40.
And Lord Byron did it in the Dardanelles, right?
Yeah, I must admit, never occurred to me to try it in the Bosphorus.
So you're the MC. When I play the piano, you open and you close.
Please join me thanking our wonderful interlocutors today for a lovely conversation.
Somebody said a celebration. You did, I think, yeah. I should have said it at the beginning, we are celebrating however many years and decades or whatever of scholarship that has left a very, very, very rich trace in the field.
Well, thank you very much. If I've done anything with the field, you know, I would idealize these people like Red House or Dosson or Inalge or Barkhan, these scholars who really did devote themselves to something. And you know, I never imagined I would get old and at the end this stuff would happen. But anyway, it was the sort of thing I wanted to do, and I think it's, you know, if we all try to do our best, I feel like that's what we'd all be trying to do, and it's partly a matter of dumb luck whether we succeed, and partly just a matter of persistence. There were many times when I could have given up. A lot of times writing that history of bureaucracy, for example, I thought, damn, this is complicated. But on the other hand, if I just divide it up in small pieces, I can get the next one done. And you just have to keep, you know, you have persistence. One of the traits that runs in my family is making a living out of something that other people would think was impossible to make a living out of it. If you saw the land that my grandparents farmed, you too would have wanted to move to California. Okay? Which most of their neighbors did. But they made things grow there. It's the fascination of what's difficult. I believe that's a line from a poem by Yeats. The fascination of what's difficult. That is a motivator. You know, this problem is there. And of course, solving it is going to be a lot harder than you wish it was. But if you just persist, maybe you will get it solved.
And passion. I mean, being passionate about what you do. I mean, I think it's.
Oh yeah, if there's anything cynical, or you know, if there's anything flagging about your motivation, well, those are the people who end up, you know, in alcoholics or I don't know what. So, thank you one and all.
Thank you very much.